The Benin expedition of 1897 was a punitive expedition by a British force of 1,200 men under Sir Harry Rawson in response to the ambush of a previous British embassy under Acting Consul General James Phillips, of the Niger Coast Protectorate. Rawson's troops captured and sacked Benin City, bringing to an end the Kingdom of Benin, which was eventually absorbed into colonial Nigeria. The expedition freed about 100 Itsekiri Africans, who had been enslaved by the Edo of Benin City following the massacre of the British embassy led by Phillips. At the end of the 19th century, the Kingdom of Benin had managed to retain its independence during the scramble for Africa, and the Oba of Benin exercised a monopoly over trade in Benin's territories, which the Royal Niger Company considered a threat. In 1892, Deputy Commissioner and Vice Consul Captain Henry Lionel Galway (1859–1949) tried to negotiate a trade agreement with Oba Obanramwen Nogbazi (1888–1914) to allow for the free passage of goods through his territory and the development of the palm oil industry. Captain Galway would push for British interests in the region, especially of the palm oil industry, by attempting to negotiate a free trade agreement with the Oba at the time. Later on, Moore would urge the Foreign Office to use whatever means to secure the signed treaty, up to and including force. Galway signed the treaty with the Oba and his chiefs, which gave Britain legal justification for exerting greater influence in the region. While the treaty itself contained clauses which suggested that the Oba had sought British protection, this was not corroborated by either him or Galway. According to Galway's own account, the Oba was hesitant to sign the treaty. After the British consul Richard Burton visited Benin in 1862, he described it a place of gratuitous barbarity which stinks of death, a narrative which was publicized in Britain and increased pressure for the territory's incorporation into the British Empire. While the treaty granted free trade to British merchants operating in the Kingdom of Benin, the Oba persisted in requiring customs duties. Since Major, later Sir Claude Maxwell MacDonald, the Consul General of the Oil River Protectorate authorities considered the treaty legal and binding, he deemed the Oba's requirements a violation of the accord and thus a hostile act. In 1894, after the capture of Ibrohimi, the trading town of the chief Nana Alamu by a combined Royal Navy and Niger Coast Protectorate force, the Kingdom of Benin increased the military presence on its own southern borders. These developments, combined with the colonial office's refusal to grant approval for an invasion of Benin City, scuttled an expedition the Protectorate had planned for early 1895. Even so, between September 1895 and mid-1896 3 attempts were made by the Protectorate to enforce the Galway Treaty of 1892, firstly by Major P. Copeland Crawford, Vice Consul of the Benin District, secondly by Ralph Frederick Locke, the Vice Consul Assistant, and thirdly by Captain Arthur Malling, Commandant of the Niger Coast Protectorate Force Detachment based in Sapele. In March 1896, following price fixing and refusals by Itsekiri middlemen to pay the required tributes, the Oba of Benin ordered a cessation of the supply of oil palm produce to them. The trade embargo brought trade in the Benin River region to a standstill, and the British merchants in the region appealed to the Protectorate's Consul General to open up Benin territories and to send the Oba, whom they claimed was an obstruction to their trading activities, into exile. In October 1896, the acting Consul General, James Robert Phillips, visited the Benin River District and met with the agents and traders, who convinced him that there is a future on the Benin River if Benin territories were opened. In November 1896, Phillips, the vice consul of a trading post on the African coast, decided to meet with the Oba in Benin City in regards to the trade agreement that the Oba had made with the British but was not keeping. He formally asked his superiors in London for permission to visit Benin City, claiming that the costs of such an expedition would be recouped by trading for ivory. In late December 1896, without waiting for a reply or approval, Phillips embarked on an expedition. Phillips had sent a message to the Oba, claiming that his present mission was to discuss trade and peace and demanding admission to the territory. Ahead of Phillips, he had sent an envoy bearing numerous gifts for trade. It was during this time that the Oba was celebrating Eid festival, and he sent word that he did not wish to see the British at the time, and he would send word in a month or two, when he was ready to receive just Phillips and one Jackery chief. On the 4th of January 1897, Phillips and his entire party was ambushed along their journey to Benin City, at Ugbine village near Guado. British officers and African porters were both slaughtered. Only 2 British survived their wounds, Alan Boisragan and Ralph Locke. Within the week, news had made it to London of the massacre. This event led to the mounting of the punitive expedition. As a result of this attack, the Foreign Office of Britain authorized military action, leading to the punitive expedition, the purported intention by Moore. It is imperative that a most severe lesson be given the kings, chiefs, and juju men of all surrounding countries, that white men cannot be killed with impunity, and that human sacrifices, with the oppression of the weak and poor, must cease. According to historian Philip Igbafe, the humanitarian and punitive justifications given by Moore ran counter to the economic justifications for military action that he and other members of the Protectorate administration promoted in the months and years before the events of February 1897. The 2 British that survived the annihilation of Phillips' expedition, which became known as the Benin Massacre, were Captain Alan Maxwell Boisragan, Commandant of the Constabulary of the Niger Coast Protectorate, who had been shot in the right arm and knee, and Ralph Locke, District Commissioner of Warri, who had been shot 4 times in the arm, and once in the hip. Bombings of civilian targets. On the 18th of February, Benin City was captured by the expedition, in spite of its defensive aya. The city was set ablaze, although it has been claimed that this was accidental. 8 members of the punitive force were recorded as being killed in action during the Benin expedition. The number of military and civilian casualties amongst the Benin people was not estimated but is thought to have been very high. The Benin expedition was described as such. In 29 days, a force of 1,200 men, coming from 3 places between 3,000 and 4,500 meters from the Benin River, was landed, organized, equipped and provided with transport. 5 days later the city of Benin was taken, and in 12 days more the men were re-embarked, and the ships coaled and ready for any further service. All in all, around 5,000 men were mobilized for the expedition, which took place over 3 weeks. After the capture of Benin City, houses, sacred sites, ceremonial buildings and palaces of many high-ranking chiefs were looted and many buildings were burned down, including the palace building itself on Sunday the 21st of February. There was evidence of previous human sacrifice found by members of the expedition, with journalists from Reuters and the Illustrated London News reporting that the town reeked of human blood. Inside the abandoned palace, a terrible sight was revealed to the British. The Oba, in panic of what he had done and in fear of a retaliatory attack, had embarked in a great mass of human sacrifice in order to stave off full disaster. Bodies of those sacrificed by the Oba laid in pits and many hung crucified in trees. The Oba was eventually captured by the British Consul General, Ralph Moore. He was deposed and exiled, with 2 of his 80 wives, to Calabar. A British resident was appointed, and 6 chiefs were hanged in Benin City's marketplace. Most of the plunder from the city was retained by the expedition, with some 2,500 official figures, religious artifacts, Benin visual history, mnemonics and artworks being sent to Britain. They include over 1,000 metal plaques and sculptures collectively known as the Benin Bronzes. The Admiralty confiscated and auctioned off the war booty to defray the costs of the expedition. About 40% of the art was accessioned to the British Museum, while other works were given to individual members of the armed forces as spoils of war, and the remainder was sold at auction by the Admiralty to pay for the expedition as early as May 1897. Stevens Auction Rooms, 38 King Street, London, the 25th of May 1897, followed by several sales by the ethnographic dealer William Downing Webster, Bicester, between 1898 and 1900. Most of the Benin bronzes sold at auction were purchased by museums, mainly in Germany. The dispersal of Benin artworks to museums around the world catalyzed the beginnings of a long and slow European reassessment of the value of West African art. The Benin art was copied and the style integrated into the art of many European artists and thus had a strong influence on the early formation of modernism in Europe. The British occupied Benin, which was absorbed into the British Niger Coast Protectorate and eventually into British colonial Nigeria. A general emancipation of slaves followed in the wake of British occupation, and with it came an end to human sacrifice. However, the British instituted a system of drafting locals to work as forced laborers in often poor conditions that were not much better than had been during the previous Benin Empire. Please subscribe, follow and like this page for more African historical stories like this.